thank you for taking the time to join this briefing about EU logistics. Just a couple of things before we start. First of all, you'll be able to see at the top of your screen the Q&A button. There's the possibility to jot down any questions that you might have as they come to you. But we will be going through the presentation. It won't take too long. We're hoping to maximise the amount of time at the end for Q&A. Also joining me on this call is Alan Vincent, who is technical advisor on logistics and VAT, and he'll be available with me for any detailed questions that might come up at the end of the session. So we'll kick off. What we're going to talk about today, I'm going to give a quick overview. Then we're going to talk about the route to market that we've privileged and we're focusing on, and the reasons why. We'll then discuss some of the responsibilities of exporters, and in particular with relation to VAT and customs clearance. And then we'll summarise in a couple of tables the VAT options and implications, both for single producer exports, but also from the multi-producer export consolidation aspect, which comes into play for some companies, but also could affect everybody when it comes to sending products for events, for example. Then we'll run through a checklist for the particular Incoterm that we are focusing on. And then we'll have a quick discussion about samples and events, supply, and we've picked out some typical cost examples at the end. Obviously, it's not possible to be entirely accurate 100% with costs. Things like shipping, transport, etc., are all variable depending on the case-by-case situation. But there are some typical costs that we have pulled out, so that you can be aware of those. So in terms of the overview of this session, really the purpose of it is to try to provide a clear and concise summary of the key elements involved in getting your dairy products across to the EU. It's not an A to Z. It's not every possible way of doing it. We're focusing on, first of all, the areas where companies have flagged up to us are having the most problems with, the most difficult to deal with, either through cost or complexity or both. And that's why we're also pulling out a particular part of the briefing in relation to samples, which have been some of the trickiest things to deal with when it comes to EU post-Brexit. So the route that we're choosing, it's not the only one available to dairy exporters. There are various points of entry into the EU, but for simplicity, but not just simplicity, we are focusing on the cross-channel route into France, and that's either for delivery within France or onward delivery through to the rest of the EU. There are additional advantages to this route, which we'll set out in this briefing. We're also focusing in terms of Incoterm on DDP shipments, so delivered duty paid. And the reason for that is that very often, well, first of all, very often it can be, companies can find themselves having to do DDP in order to start a relationship, get samples over. That tends to be the time when the customer in the EU might be the least inclined to make great effort until they understand whether they want to work with you or not. So it is something that companies come up against. Clearly, there are, for some companies, their customers in the EU are going to have different arrangements. They might even say, we'll come to the UK and pick up, or if you can get the products to the border, we'll take it from there. There'll be different Incoterms that come into play. But this is the one we're focusing on primarily because it is the one where, with the most responsibility falling on the exporter, and also represents the highest level of cost So that's why we're focusing on this. So using France as a gateway into the EU, there are, as I said, a number of reasons why we're doing that. There's a number of advantages. It is the easiest, and the reason for that is, first of all, well, it's the shortest crossing, and the Calais border post operates 24/7. But above that, they've also invested a heck of a lot of money into making it a very attractive place to enter the EU. One of the things they've invested in on both sides of the border is a reciprocal VAT agreement with the UK. So now that means where there is a VAT declaration to be done, it's a paper declaration. No longer do you have to pay out the VAT and then claim it back, as you would still do in some other ports of entry into the EU. Also, UK companies can now acquire a French VAT number without having to set up a company in France. So that, as you will see later in the briefing, is an important element when it comes to exporting DDP into the EU. Once the goods are in France and cleared customs, there's no sales VAT on any sale to a customer in another EU country that's delivered to after clearance in France. So that is also an important point. And also there's no duty on, there shouldn't be any duty on our products, our dairy products, assuming that the origin is GB or UK. So we'll touch a little bit now on the responsibilities that fall on the exporter and importer of record when it comes to DDP shipments. So first of all, the exporter of record, that's the UK company who has title to the products and is sending them to the customer. It's fairly straightforward. The importer of record in the EU will also have to be the same company because you have title to the goods all the way to the customer's door. This necessitates the EU exporter to have an EU EORI number and to use a VAT number in the country of clearance, in this case, France. When it comes to VAT, how to manage this aspect of it, there are two options for UK companies. And the first one, and I apologise for the smaller text here, but this briefing will be available afterwards to be able to be read and reread and consulted. The first option is what is known as Regime 40. So this is where the UK company will obtain a French VAT number in the UK company's name. With that and an EORI number in place, the UK company can be the importer of record in France and clear the goods in their own name and declaring the import VAT on their own French VAT return, which they would have to do monthly. Once that's done and the goods are cleared, then the goods can be in free circulation anywhere within the EU and sold to any other business in France or elsewhere in the EU. The other option is Regime 42, and this is where the UK company doesn't have its own VAT, French VAT number, and doesn't do French VAT declarations. It uses a third-party global VAT number in order to declare the import VAT. Obviously, that is a service that is payable. A third party to rent out their VAT number must be accredited in France. And it works the same way as Regime 40, but there is one major restriction, and that is you can only use Regime 42 if the goods are transiting onwards out of France. They cannot remain and be sold in France. So basically what that means is, as a UK exporter, if you require to supply your customer delivered duty paid, you can only do it under Regime 40 with your own French VAT number, or through another arrangement where the customer is taking more responsibility, such as DAP or ex-UK. So once you know which method is going to be used, the company has a COI number, which it will need in any scenario, and the VAT numbers are in place. Then the goods can go through the CWEP checks and the clear customs in Cali. Once they're cleared, they're in free circulation, and they don't require any other checks, transit documents, or don't incur any other VAT liability. The sale would now be deemed to be a sale within the EU after these goods are cleared. So there's no sales VAT, as previously mentioned. So basically, under either of those regimes, there's no VAT to pay out or claim back, no VAT to charge in terms of sales, and no VAT to collect. So it is a simplified system. Now, importantly, this process is the same whether the company is sending samples in small quantities or whether you're sending goods for sale in larger quantities. Any goods basically coming into the EU are considered and treated in the same manner. I'm just now going to summarise the export, the VAT implications on export for single producer shipments in this table. As I say, this will be available for consultation later, so bear with me with the slightly smaller text. So when it comes to DDP, and in the case where the UK exporter has acquired its own French VAT number, as in regime 40, as described previously. This means you can deliver anywhere, including France. The implications of this are, I mean, the desirability of this is that you're really operating on a level par with EU competitors. However, there is a cost. So it really only becomes economically viable with regular and more frequent shipments. And we'll give an indication of that cost at the end of the briefing. But the startup cost, the application cost, is already €1,000. The ongoing costs are variable depending on volume, frequency, country of destination. In the case of doing DDP using a third-party French VAT number, as in regime 42, your destinations are EU, but not France. You can only transit through France. But another implication of this is that each customer or destination in the shipment requires an import and export declaration. So let's say you have a pallet coming in, it's getting split down, and it's going to 3 different customers in 3 different places within the EU, not in France. Each one of those requires its own individual export and import declaration, and therefore the costs are multiplied by the number of customers involved in any one shipment. That is about €90 per declaration. So you can see that once you start getting to a certain volume, the option of having your own French VAT number starts to become more economically viable. But for infrequent, less regular shipments, it probably isn't viable to have your own VAT number. And just for comparison, for DAP, that is where the customer, your customer imports and your customer uses their VAT number to do the import declarations and import VAT. That operates anywhere in the EU. It could theoretically be a disincentive potentially compared to other competitors, depending on what the customer's view is of the situation. And the customer pays costs and deals with the VAT, which, of course, might be good for the EU exporter, but if the customer doesn't really want to do that or views that as a hassle because they're not fully obliged yet to be working with you or fully signed up to be or fully convinced that they need to work with you yet, that could be a disincentive. Moving on. So we wanted to do the same, to look at this in the same way for multiple producer export consolidation. As mentioned before, some companies are already, that's their business model, but also every company could be affected. For example, sending products for trade show or for an event. And indeed, we have an event coming up in October where we are asking quite a number of producers potentially to supply products. So it is very relevant. So two scenarios. One is where one consolidator, this is your typical consolidator, will take title to all of the goods and is the single exporter of record. So basically the same conditions, the same options are available that applied for single export, because effectively this is a single export. The implications of this are that that would satisfy an EU customer or an event or trade show that needs products from more than one producer, supplied on a level par with any EU competition, and with all of the responsibility being taken care of. It's a single export cost, but of course there is the added cost of bringing these products together at a location in the UK. There's also potentially a risk for the consolidator taking title to the goods, who perhaps there'll be goods that they are not manufacturing themselves, so there is potentially a risk in doing that. However, the costs could, when it comes to, let's say, the event in October around Cial, it could be that one company takes title, but the cost of all that is shared out amongst everybody who is wanting to get their products over. So an arrangement can be made for something like that. If you go to the more traditional consolidation option, which is mainly an example would be a logistics company that offers to bring the products together but is not taking title to the goods, then each manufacturer, each supplier of product is themselves, therefore, the exporter of record. They're just all traveling together in the same load. The same conditions apply, but this multiplies the number of declarations and number of VAT handlings by the number of producers involved. So if you have a number of a pallet or a number of pallets going in the one shipment, and you have 20 the products from 20 companies, each all having retaining title to their goods, then you have 20 declarations and 20 sets of costs in that one shipment. So the multiple import declarations and the multiple VAT handling situations is less attractive to an EU customer, and especially when you're working with the customer on DAP, where the customer is responsible for the import. This could be an incentive, in theory, to aim to work with fewer UK producers, because the fewer producers you work with, the lower the costs, or the less number of declarations, therefore the less cost. So it kind of can work against proliferation, and that's working against the interests of the UK exporters. The and obviously also the multiple products can make it very, very prohibitively expensive when it comes to events and trade shows, when there is no customer paying a purchase price. The cost of that, especially under the situation where you've got multiple producers with all retaining title to their goods, and you just have a logistics company taking the products over, the cost of that would be huge. And the question is, where does that cost sit? And many of you will have encountered this, and this is one of the major problems, particularly when it comes to getting products samples over to places like Gulf Food or Cial. I'm sure most of you have encountered the situation where you're being asked to pay thousands of pounds for the privilege of doing it. And this is exactly why. So we'll come back to the question of cost and samples and events. First of all, just for DDP exporting, just wanted to go through the checklist just for companies who perhaps are not already doing this. It might be helpful and good as a reminder. So the key elements required in DDP exporting, the company will need to have an export health certificate. If in the case of multi-producer consolidation, where the consolidator is taking title to all of the goods, then the manufacturer will be supplying an attestation rather than the export health certificate, and the consolidator would get a health certificate, one health certificate for the whole load at the point of consolidation. The export health certificate gets converted to what's known as a CHED, Common Health Entry Document, at port, and that's for entry into the EU. The exporter or exporters need their EORI number. There needs to be commercial invoice. That needs to be detailed with things that you would not normally need in the UK, such as commodity codes and EORI numbers of customer as well as your own. The packing list, again, detailed. It's very important that at border control they can see, at customs they can see exactly what is in the shipment, and that outer cases and multiple outer cases, multiple boxes inside outer cases, all of that is explained clearly on the packing list. So you can look at the packing list and you look at the goods and it makes sense. The French VAT number that is going to be applied now, whether that's the one that you've got because you are the exporter and you've acquired your own French VAT number under regime 40, or the third-party number under regime 42. The export declaration for exiting the UK, and indeed the import declaration for entry into the EU, in this case in Cali. So for single producer export, you get the EHC signed by and approved vet, and normally that would require the vet to inspect the goods at the manufacturer's location. Then the CHED gets converted out of that EHC. Your exporter already has their EORI number previously applied for, if they don't already have it. The commercial invoice goes with the goods, as does the packing list. There's the decision that is this regime 40, is it regime 42, depending on what the company is planning to do with regards to VAT. And in order to do the declarations, normally the exporter will engage a customs broker. And ideally, that customs broker is going to be connected or have a very good relationship with an import customs broker in the country destination, in this case, Cali, in France, in order to make a seamless transition with good communication and no issues. In the case of the same thing, but for multiple producer export consolidation, where the consolidator has title to the goods, the EHC will be inspection at point of consolidation, one EHC covering all of the products because the consolidator has title to the goods, but it will be based on attestations supplied by each manufacturer. Now, those usually are provided by the local manufacturer's EHO, and they usually last for a period of time. That is one where I found there has been some variability from EHO to EHO, but typically it can be several months, if not a year, validity. So it is something that there is a cost associated with, usually with getting that from the EHO, but it tends to pay for itself over time. Then, of course, in the same way as for single producer, the CHED gets converted. The consolidator has a EORI number. There is the consolidated documentation, which combines everybody's individual product information into one invoice. Same with the packing list. The decision as to regime 40 or 42 for VAT, and of course the engagement of export and import customs brokers as per single export. This is really for reference, so it will be available with the rest of the briefing to consult at any time later. Just before we come on to cost, which would be the last thing before Q&A, just wanted to come back onto the subject of samples and event supply. So samples free of charge are considered in the same way as chargeable goods for EU import and VAT purposes. So even though you're going to be giving the product for free for an event or to get products to your own stand, they are still considered to be chargeable. What this means is, although if you remember, we're going this way on DDP through France, we're not having to pay out VAT and then claim it back. So there's no real monetary impact. It's a paper exercise. It's that process that we've already described. They should be given a value. So what value to give them? Well, as per the UK government website will tell you, they needs to be based on identical products, or if there isn't an identical product that you can refer to, then similar products. So let's take the example of blue cheese. Well, if they were going to check, they would be able to look and see roughly what does blue cheese sell for, and that would be the measure that would be typically used. So really you should be giving a sensible value. Often that you could decide to base that on what you've previously paid or invoiced as a guide. But that's the official measurement, identical products or similar products. There's no monetary impact because, of course, it's a declaration, it's not actual payment of VAT. The supply of the consolidated load for an event or a show with multiple producer samples inside, it will be expensive if only the logistics are consolidated, as we've previously seen. And this is a problem that's regularly encountered. And the issue is, I mean, the way of reducing that cost is for one consolidator to take title to all of the producers' samples and to export that as one consolidated load with one declaration, one VAT handling. It's much more economical. The cost of doing that, the little additional cost of that company doing that job could be shared in theory out amongst all the producers who have an interest in getting their products over to the destination, or indeed in some cases could even be paid for by an event contractor if there is money available to do that. The issue is the risk for taking other title to other manufactured products for no commercial gain. That is really sitting outside the normal business model for most companies. Those who do generally take title to other people's goods tend to be wholesalers who are making a margin. So there's a commercial payback for doing that, for taking on that risk. And we have quite a few of those companies in the UK. But the one when it comes to getting samples over or supplying events and trade shows where there is no commercial advantage, there's no commercial, there's a value for customs, but there's no real payment for the goods. That is the one that is the trickiest. And we are working with some of our UK companies experienced in consolidation and experienced in exporting to find solutions to get products over for CL, to get products over for other events and trade shows. And that is one where, for the first one up for CL, we're going to be coming back to you with the method that we're going to deploy to be able to do that. But it does remain an issue. It does remain going forward a problem, a real problem for UK exporters that usually only gets a one-off solution through negotiation with somebody. And we really could do with a more viable long-term solution to that problem. So we'll be keeping working on that. Finally, before we move to Q&A, we just wanted to pull out some cost examples where typical costs can be confirmed. So if you don't already have one, your EORI number is a €100 application. Typically, your export health certificate will be around £250. That usually should include the cost of the vet coming to inspect. The conversion of that to CHED border will be typically £118. The cost of export declaration typically £26. And then in terms of the import declaration, it'll either be under regime 40, which is a typical cost to be £60, or under regime 42, the third party VAT number would typically be in the region of £76. The cost of applying for your French VAT number, as we said, €1,000, £840 at current exchange rates. But there's a cost of maintaining your VAT number and doing your monthly French VAT returns. Now that's variable. It depends on the level of sales, the frequency of sales, if the deliveries are to France or to other EU countries. If the deliveries are through France to other EU countries, there's intrastat declarations to make, which add to the cost. So it's not really possible to give an indication, much indication of cost, but you could say for, and also there are in terms of sales, there are breaks. So there's up to 100,000, 100,000 to 250,000, 250,000 to 500,000, depends on how much business you're doing in the year. But for many of our small to medium-sized companies doing regular business with the EU, it could be somewhere in the region between £3,000 and £5,000 a year on top of the application cost. So in that scenario, you can see there will be a break point where you'll be starting with using a third-party VAT number, accessing that via your customs broker. And then at some point in terms of the business that you're doing, once you get to a certain level and a certain frequency, it may become viable to look at acquiring your own VAT number. The exception to that situation, of course, is if you're using a third-party VAT number, you cannot, and entering in France via France, you cannot deliver to France. So your solution there, before getting your own VAT number for France, would be working with your customer to work on a DAP basis. There's no other solution. So that concludes the briefing. As I say, it will be available, will be made available through Swapcard for consultation as per the other market briefings. And we'll just open up to Q&A. And there may be some questions that I can handle, but I'd also like to bring in Alan Vincent, who understands all of this much better than even I do. Do we have any questions in the chat? I don't think so. I'm not seeing any. So, Alan, you think you're on mute, but maybe you could kick off by letting us, giving us the answers to some of the typical questions that you get asked about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Roddy. Appreciate that. So a couple of things in there. It's worthwhile mentioning that a lot of my clients come to me and say, I've already got an EORI number, I'm okay. You've got to have an EU EORI number to get your goods into the EU. A lot of companies have a GB EORI number. We're not in the European Union anymore, so that doesn't count. You must apply for an EU EORI number in order to be the importer of record on a DDP shipment. So when you're talking about consolidation and consolidation, in a almost like a mini groupage sense, where the one consolidator takes ownership of title, that consolidator will have to have a commercial invoice with the client. So there's going to have to be a commercial invoice that accompanies all of those goods, again consolidated into one. If those goods are for multiple, if it's not for a trade event or not for a single point of destination, then there's going to be multiple declarations to follow those goods, because the rule that sticks with everything throughout all of this, the flow of goods has to follow the flow of invoices. So if there are multiple recipients, different companies in the same country or different countries, then there'll be multiple import declarations in order for those flow of invoices to follow the flow of goods. What's also important as well, and it does come up when we're talking about trade shows and exhibitions, still has to be a customer at the end. For that import declaration, there has to be a customer that has a VAT number in that country, because VAT is a tracking tool, nothing more. It's always supposed to be net zero for businesses. And your tracking tool is your import VAT, which, as Roddy rightly says, is declared, not paid. You're declaring that, and you're declaring to the French authorities, these goods worth this amount, therefore the VAT amount percentage of it are going to this destination. And this destination has to be either an EU company, Germany, Spain, wherever, with a VAT number in that country, or a French company with a VAT number in that country. And if it's an exhibition, there has to be somewhere for it to go. There has to be a recipient. So, well worth taking that into consideration as well when we're talking about we need to get things out. The having your own French VAT number, the break-even point now with the pricing is about, I would say it's about 12 to 15 deliveries a month, 3 a week. About that point is where it starts to become better and cleaner to have your own VAT number than to use Regime 42 and use somebody else's. As Roddy rightly said, if you're delivering to a company in France, you will need to have a French VAT number anyway, or do DAP. So that's the tipping point now with the current pricing model. The VAT thresholds that we were talking about, sorry to correct you slightly here, Roddy, but those thresholds, 0 to 100, 100 to 250,000, 250,000 to 500,000, are per month, not per year. So it's how much the total value of goods that you sent in that month will go towards your next French VAT return, which is done monthly, has to be done monthly, and has to be done even if you've done no business. You have to submit a 0 VAT return, and of course you will get charged for doing that by the people who represent you and do your VAT returns in France. Which you can do yourself if you've got the VAT knowledge and if you've got the French language skills, because all documentation is in France, and you will have to have a relationship with the French VAT authorities yourself. But you can do it yourself. I would advise get an expert on your side and let an expert do it. Much the same as you do your tax returns in this country and you employ an accountant to do your management accounts at the end. It's the same thing. You don't have to appoint a fiscal representative in France. It's not necessary. You don't have to have an entity in France. Again, not necessary. You can have a French VAT number and use a VAT agent to submit your VAT returns with no entity, with no corporation tax liabilities in France, no social costs, no management accounts, because you don't have an entity, and all of your profits remain in the UK. So because it's a UK business using the French VAT number as a vessel for trade within the EU. I think that was all of my notes to that, Roddy. Yeah, the main questions that I get from clients are, I've been told I need to set up an entity. I've been told that the Netherlands is better to do business with. It's obviously it's a longer transit journey to get your goods into the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, if you wanted to have your own Dutch VAT number and clear on a Dutch VAT number in the same way as France, you would have to appoint a fiscal representative who would take on the liability for you, and that's far more expensive. You could choose to pay the import VAT upfront and claim it back, but in order to claim it back, you'll have to appoint a fiscal representative and claim under the 13th directive, which is a cost. So the pros and cons, when you weigh it all up over the course of the year, 3 years, 5 years, France is a much more attractive opportunity to get your goods into the EU quickly, get them in free circulation as fast as possible, and get them delivered to your clients with the minimum amount of delays.
Thanks, Alan. That's great. Really good detailed advice. I think one of the questions we could anticipate that might come up is people say, well, can't I just send my samples by DHL or similar courier and post them off and send and forget? My experience of that has been very rarely it works, and more often than not, you get a call or a contact from DHL or other couriers saying your goods are held in some central place waiting for your decision about VAT and all the rest of it. So would that be your advice too?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not disparaging the global parcel network at all. Your TNTs, your DPDs, your DHLs, all of those, FedEx, etc. Their sole goal is to move your goods from one point to another that maximizes their profits. That's what they do, and they do it very well. But you are not in control of that. So whatever route that they go into the EU is on them. If there's a space on a plane that's landing in Amsterdam and you're sending your goods to France, but the space on the plane, so profitable wise, it works better for them to send it to Amsterdam, that's what will happen. And you'll get either a phone call or a bill for VAT coming into the Netherlands. When you said, well, but it was supposed to go to France, why didn't you just go Dover, Calais? Well, that wasn't the most profitable route for us. You're not in control of the logistics arm of that delivery, and that means that timescales, VAT costs, logistic costs are out of your control. Now, if you want to do that, you can absolutely fine. Put it in a box, phone FedEx, get them to send it. But it can cause problems, especially within the products of animal origin field. It can absolutely cause problems because which customs authorities you're dealing with. If you're going to France and only clearing in France, you're only dealing with one set of customs authorities. Port of Calais, it's a 24/7 port. The civet isn't 24/7, but it does work long hours. So you know what you're getting, you know what you're dealing with, and you know what's going to clear, and all of the checklists that Roddy put together in order to have that paperwork nice and clean, and you're in control. And that's why DDP is so appealing for UK exporters, is that you're in control of that supply chain from your door to your client's doorstep. You are taking the burden of administration away from that EU client, which they will love, and you are taking control because you know when the paperwork's right, when your partners are right, both in terms of your haulier and your brokers. With ourselves, we are a UK broker, we're actually in Northern Ireland, but we're a UK broker that can do the import declarations in 10 EU countries as well, all in-house. So once you've got your haulier, your broker, all set up and your vet to do the checks, then you know your paperwork is clean as a whistle, and that goods are going to sail through straight to your customer's doorstep. If you rock up to the Spanish authorities at 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, your goods are going to stay there till Monday morning, maybe Monday afternoon. And that's just the way it is. It's just, that's the way it works. Some ports, some authorities don't work the kind of hours that we expect them to. So having something consistent and predictable is what the logistics industry and people sending through the logistics industry need. We need it to be consistent. We need it to be predictable. We need to be able to forecast exactly what time it's going to take, because that's cost, getting it to our customers, that's, servicing our customers in the EU the best way possible. So in my mind, DDP, using France as a gateway into the EU, is by far the best way to go about moving your goods. No transit documents, no T1s, T2s, no, dealing with multiple vet authorities, no discharging at border points that might not be anywhere near your customers. It's all done at point of entry in Calais.
Thanks. And if there's no other questions, there's another one that does come to mind that some of our manufacturers, I'm sure, come up against is that's all very well. That all sounds extremely sensible, but I just can't find a haulier to actually take my goods. So there are hauliers out there who will do who will do groupage. What would your thoughts be on the current sort of availability of those types of haulage services?
Yeah, there are multiple hauliers out there that do groupage and refrigerated groupage into mainland EU and over into Ireland. There are a number of hubs, consolidation hubs. I think we've got a major client that's got one in Skelmersdale, for example, which because they service Ireland daily. Skelmersdale is a perfect point, but also the trucks out of Skelmersdale go down to Folkestone or Dover on a daily basis. And there are multiple haulage companies out there that will do groupage if the volumes are right, if the numbers are right. A lot have scheduled trucks going to EU destinations, which will have space on them for you to be able to put your goods on them. So the routes are out there. Absolutely. It's not something that we don't have to reinvent something. We don't have to persuade the company to start something new in order to facilitate this. The routes and the procedures are out there. And post-Brexit, all of these VAT procedures are rock solid. It's EU VAT law. Each country has its own VAT laws, France, Germany, the Netherlands, etc. But the overarching law is EU VAT law. So that is bedded in, it's rock solid, and it's not a workaround, it's not a loophole. Regime 42 has been called a loophole for a long time, ever since I've been dealing with EU VAT and customs, but it really isn't. It's a perfectly acceptable way of getting your goods into mainland EU.
Great, thanks. And just as a reminder then for our companies, if they were to engage with a customs broker, the customs broker will be able to, obviously it's a chargeable service, but they would, and some of the costs we had a look at earlier, that they would be able to sort out potentially your export declarations, your import declarations under DDP, and the connected VAT under regime 42, they'd be able to offer that service as well for a fee. Is that right?
Yeah, yes. Some brokers can do it all. We will love them. Some brokers will only do the UK exports, and you'll have to find your own relationship with a French broker, and that French broker might not be able to facilitate a VAT number. They might not deal with VAT at all. So you might have to find a relationship with a French company that can provide you with a VAT number and pay them separately. Or a broker like themselves, we could do it all for you in-house. We can facilitate your relationship with a partner in France that will represent you for VAT. Is probably the best way to put it.
Right. The comprehensive all-in-one solution, it does exist out there.
It absolutely does exist. You will still have to have a relationship with your VAT advisor in France, and it will be a separate relationship, but that's because it's VAT and that's because it's dealing with documents of the French authorities, and that is right and proper, and that's French law. Absolutely, you will have that relationship personally, if you like, if you want to call it that way, but it can be managed by someone like myself. We can make the introductions, we can manage it. I can be the point of contact for all of it.
Thanks. So we have a question then. Question from Joe. Yes, when it comes to finding those hauliers who do have the groupage space for specific destinations, it can sometimes be difficult to find. I think where there's a specific destination inquiries like that, I think we'll, if you don't mind, Alan, we'll take that offline, and perhaps that's one that you could engage with directly in terms of taking that one forward.
Your question's just come up on my side, Joe. I've just seen that 2 to 5 pallets to Spain each week. Shouldn't be a problem. But we can talk afterwards. I'll just have to make a couple of calls to find out who's the best person to put you in touch with.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that. I think there don't seem to be any other questions, so We'll give it a minute in case there are. But as I say, this is going to be available through the swap card ongoing. Should have be around for a few months at least, so certainly it's something that can be people can come back to and consult again. And by all means, if there are any questions that come to mind or specific situations that people are looking for assistance with after sometime afterwards, or maybe that come up as a result of meeting some EU buyers at the forthcoming UK Dairy Showcase, and you require some input, then by all means come back to myself, and if connecting you with Alan or with any other service providers that we have connections with to help, we'll obviously be very happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy for you to share my details, and any help I can give anybody, please do get in touch. And Joe, for your question, please do send me your email, and I'll give you an answer later today.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, I think we'll maybe bring it to conclusion if there's no other questions. Just like to thank you for your time, Alan. That's been really helpful to have your in-depth knowledge as a backup. Yes, as I say, any questions that come to mind after the fact, don't hesitate to come back in touch with us, and we will do our best to connect you with solutions. And on the specific question of those companies who are being canvassed currently to get to confirm their desire to be involved with the event at CL in October and to have products there, come back to us on that, because we are trying to put a consolidated solution in place for that, along the lines of what we've just been describing. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, I hope to speak to you all soon.
Thanks, Roddy.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.